Hi, my name is Ken Robinson, and I'm the course director for Project and Portfolio 2. I'm going to be showing you how to set up a very simple audio system, which is typically used at corporate events. So we're going to be using the M32 console today. We're going to be using the QSC KW181 sub and the QSC K12 as examples for our PA, and we're also going to be utilizing a QSC K10 for a floor monitor for talent. So let's get started and show you how to put this together. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start to actually connect our system. All right, so imagine that everything is in place. The first thing that you would need to think about is the venue that you're dealing with, right? So, typically your console is going to be more at a front of house position, somewhere out in the audience area, while your speakers are going to be placed in the best location to cover your audience effectively. For the nature of the purpose of this tutorial, we're keeping everything very close together, and you will also notice that I have a snake to connect. There's no need for a snake when you're dealing with this scenario where everything is this close together, but when you're in a bit larger venue and you have front of house at a position out in the audience area, a snake is absolutely vital to that scenario. So we're going to hook it up as if we were utilizing the snake and everything that you would utilize in the classroom. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start thinking about what are my inputs. So if there's going to be a microphone on stage, what I would need to do is I would need to deal with the input side of the snake. And I'm going to assume that there's just going to be a single microphone on stage. So I'm going to go ahead and plug my input 1 into channel 1 of the console. Okay, so if that's the only input that I have going from the stage, then now what I need to do is start to worry about, well, what outputs of the console am I going to utilize? Okay, now on this console, as you may remember, outputs 7 and 8 are already defaulted as your left and right. Most people would denote A as left and B as right, but it's all copper wire, so it's really up to you. So your reds are your returns, and you can tell because they're females. And I have A through D here. So as I mentioned, I would want to make the house left side of my PA A, so I'm going to plug that in output 7. And then I would make the house right side of my PA B, and I'm going to go ahead and plug that into output 8. And then if I have a floor monitor for the talent and I'm going to be sending a full back signal so that they get direct signal from themselves in case they're in a large room, I have 2 returns left, C and D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use output C. I have 6 outputs left. I'm just going to go ahead and use the first output for my monitor wedge. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to start plugging in our inputs and taking care of our outputs. As I mentioned, I'm utilizing the snake even though I don't need it in the scenario with the speakers being as close as they are, but I want you guys to imagine as if the console was much further away from your actual speakers for your talent and for the audience. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assume, okay, well, if I have 1 microphone on stage, then I'm going to go ahead and use input 1 on my stage box and go ahead and plug in my microphone input. So now that that is completed, now what I need to do is I need to start thinking about outputting from my snake to my speakers. So before I get into that, I want to take a look at the back panel and what's actually going on with the speaker. So you'll notice that there are a few controls on the back of the speaker. I mean, one of the easiest to notice is, of course, the on-off power switch is down at the bottom by the IEC. Then when you start looking up towards the top, notice that this speaker has dual inputs. So you have an input A and an input B. Interestingly enough, input A has the ability to be switched from line to mic. Notice input B does not have that ability. The reason for that is if you had no mixer at all, and as an example, if you had an acoustic guitar player and with a vocal and this system, they could easily plug their vocal microphone into input A, set it to mic, and then plug into the line input from their guitar, and then you can blend the two together with the volume knobs that are going on each input. We don't need to do that. So we definitely need to make sure that our setting is to line and not to mic, because this is going to be line output from the console and inputting into this speaker. Then you also notice some other controls here. You have the ability to choose if you want to run this speaker with an external sub, or you can run it in normal mode, or lastly in deep mode. The difference between the three, external sub is actually going to apply a high pass filter because it's assuming that you're going to be using a sub with it. Normal is the normal frequency response of the speaker set, and deep, of course, gives a low end extension. So for a floor monitor, we would want that set to normal. Then you also have the ability to choose if you want to run this flat or add a vocal boost, which boosts the high end, which we won't need for today. And lastly, over here on the side, you can change what the LEDs do on the front of the speaker. You can turn them off altogether. You can have it turn blue when the speaker is powered on, or if it's set to limit, what will happen is it will only flash blue while it is actually hitting the limiter that is built into the speaker. So in this scenario, we're just going to run with it on power, so at least we know that the speakers are powered up. So now, with that being said, I need to go ahead and output from C and plug into input A. And make sure that your volume is turned to about 0, and then go ahead and power it up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start to work on my mains. We only set up one side of the mains for this demonstration, but as you can imagine, you would want both a left and a right side of your PA to cover your audience area. So for the demonstration purposes of this video, I'm going to come out of output A of my stage box. That's assuming that this would be the house left side of the PA. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug that in to input A on my sub and make sure that my volume is turned up somewhere close to 0. Then what I'll need to do is take a second XLR, and I picked a short one on purpose. It's only about 10 feet. And the goal of this one is we're going to use this as a jumper. We're going to go ahead and jump out of the sub, same side input that I used. And then what I can do is go ahead and run my XLR into input A. Make sure all my settings are correct. Make sure that's set to line. Go ahead and turn my volume up to 0 and go ahead and power up my speakers. So the next step that we're going to do here is we're going to actually start running signal from our input sources to our outputs that are happening, okay? So I like to approach this from a standpoint of working from my in and working to my outs. So as a reminder, I need to deal with my microphone input first. Then I can start working on sending it out to my mains and work on sending it to my monitor as well. So the first thing that I would do, everything is hooked up, is I would go ahead and start checking my microphone. Check, check, check. And what you'll see is that I have very little level coming in on this input channel. So the first thing that you always want to do is you want to get together your input gain. Okay, so on this console, the easiest way to do that is I could go ahead, hit View under Config Preamp, and then what I can do is I can start running my gain up. And as you can see, as my gain is starting to increase, I'm now hitting close to -18. -18 is considered unity on this desk. You can see it both on the metering on the screen, but you can also see it on the metering, on a low-res view of the metering on the scribble strip. The next thing I would need to do is make sure that this input is actually feeding my main stereo bus output. Easiest way to make sure that that is actually happening, go ahead and hit View under Main Bus. You can use the first knob to either assign or unassign from the left, right, or you can also see that that knob is also that button that is static all the time on the console. So that's how I can verify by selecting the channel I want to deal with, then making sure that it's actually assigned to the stereo bus. So then the next step in the world of getting signal out of my speakers is I could go ahead and bring my fader up on that channel, and then if I slowly start to bring my master fader up, you'll notice that the PA is actually starting to turn up. So now I can tell that, okay, signal's coming into this channel, it's feeding to my main bus, and it's coming out of my main bus and hitting that stereo bus, feeding, remember, the sub first, and then going to the top box through the loop out. So the other one I still have to deal with is I still have to deal with the monitor wedge. That would be for the talent. Now there's a couple things here. Right now, as you can tell, the main bus is obviously post fader, right? So as I turn the fader up and down, you can hear that level adjust. Now that is not the way that you would want this floor monitor to act, because as you adjust for the house, you would want the floor monitor's level to be static. You wouldn't want that to change in most scenarios, okay? So the only difference here is, if you remember earlier, I used bus output 1 to drive my monitor wedge. So if I'm looking now at, I'll go to routing, then you can see in routing that output 1 is analog output 1 on the back of the console is already driven by mix bus 1. So that's just something that you would want to verify, okay? So the next thing I would need to do is I would need to make sure that this channel is actually pre-fade on mix bus 1 as opposed to being post fader, all right? To do that, what I would need to do is go to the home section of the screen, then use the arrow keys to arrow over until I get to sends. Now that I'm on sends, I can see each bank of 2 sends, and I can see that most of them are all set to post EQ. Some are even set to post fader. I want to set this to pre-fader. So in order to change that, anytime you've got another screen you can get at, there's a tiny little 1 and 2 on this window. So if I hit down, I'm now on the second page, and then in banks of 2, I can choose to make this pre-fader. So I have now adjusted this input channel to be pre-fader going to this output. So as long as I'm looking at my outputs on the output section, I would need to go ahead and turn up bus output 1. Then I can select bus output 1, go into fader flip, and now these have now adjusted to become levels going to this monitor. So I have flipped all of these inputs to be outputting bus output 1. So if I slowly turn up this fader, you're going to notice that now I have audio coming out of this speaker. So that is the signal flow of how you walk your signal through coming out of your mains, and also how you walk your signal coming through the output of the monitor wedge for your talent.